Hey everyone. Yeah. This is Carmen, Managing Digital Editor at Ms., back from the National Sexual Assault Conference with Jessica Mindlin, the National Director of Training and Technical Assistance and the Director of the Oregon Office of the Victim Rights Law Center. So thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thanks for the opportunity, Carmen.
I am very excited. Can you go ahead and tell me a little bit more about the kinds of training and assistance that you provide and maybe who you work with at the Law Center?
Sure, I'd love to. I often describe us as having two arms of the Victim Rights Law Center. One is that we provide free legal services to sexual assault survivors throughout Massachusetts and in Oregon. So we're bi-coastal, East Coast and West Coast. And the other is that we have a whole training component. We have lawyers in both our East Coast and West Coast offices who dedicate their time to providing training, creating resources, tools, mentoring, doing consulting with lawyers, advocates, sexual assault nurse examiners, sometimes prosecutors, civil attorneys, law enforcement, really many different professional groups who need our advice, input, assistance in representing or advocating for survivors. And I think one of the wonderful things about the fact that we're both doing the direct legal services and also the work that we do, training and mentoring at the national level, is that our advice and assistance is all grounded in our work to represent survivors.
Yeah, well, and I feel like through this role, you've been showing like thousands of advocates and lawyers and healthcare providers sort of how to do right by survivors, and I feel like you have this insider's perspective on all of the different moving parts, right, that need to align in order for this culture to do right by survivors. So we're here talking a lot about the Me Too movement, about going beyond the breakthrough. What do you think are some of the gaps in different systems that still need fixing, that are still there, and that maybe we have the best chance right now to leverage that urgency of Me Too to really start filling?
How much time do we have? I think some of the key gaps, first of all, the gaps differ between different professional groups. I would definitely say that. I think some are more familiar and experienced and frankly committed or dedicated to providing survivor-centered services than others. And we have shifting laws in every jurisdiction. That's one of the both exciting and challenging things about doing training at the national level, especially when you have folks from all over the country in one room, because people tend to experience or generalize from what their laws are to, well, this is the way that it is. And part of our challenge is always lifting up. It's actually very different all across the country in the different states, District of Columbia, the populated U.S. territories. So really having folks pull back and think not only is it what they're seeing and what they have as resources in their own jurisdiction in terms of laws, for example, but also what's possible, what else could be done. So we do have an advocate privilege statute, for example, and is it really survivor-centered? Are you informing survivors of what their privacy rights are and how to assert them, and also where there might be any gaps? So, for example, mandatory reporting is something that lots of folks have different opinions on. Has anyone sort of taken that step back to say what's really best for survivors, and how do we create both laws and services and practices for implementing ways to make sure that we're doing like always like survivors. In terms of gaps, we're constantly being called to say, well, Victim Rights Law Center opened an office in my community or in our state. We don't have any civil legal resources for sexual assault survivors or for other survivors of gender-based violence. So I think that is a huge need. Certainly, if it's a case that has what we call a deep pocket and there's lots of money on the other side, there's maybe some hope for getting a lawyer to take that case and represent that survivor. But if there's not, it's very, very slim. And even that is about recouping money. The survivors that we're serving need so much more, and they need it now.
Yeah.
So they may need help staying in school, keeping their job, getting time off from work. Maybe they're about to get fired, or they quit their job and they need help figuring out how to navigate the unemployment compensation system, being able to live safely in their home, being able to relocate. Maybe that's the safest thing. Certainly this is a time where we're seeing a huge surge of needs in the immigration context. We have so many survivors, documented, undocumented, really covering the whole span, who are afraid. They're afraid to report to law enforcement. They're afraid if they have reported to come to court, to testify, to ask their friends or their family members. These are just such dangerous and intimidating and fearful times. So really, what's happening as a result is that many perpetrators are just never even getting reported.
Yeah. Well, and you mentioned too that across all of these different areas where you're doing this training and assistance and supporting folks who are trying to do better, that you're grounded in that approach that's at the core about the survivors that you represent on the legal side, right? So what are some of the maybe overarching best practices that you would advise the folks here at this convening, sort of activists and advocates in all different areas? What are some of the key touch points you think of how we can all just best guide our own work in trying to, fight rape culture, support survivors, sort of create these culture shifts?
Well, I think it's axiomatic, but it's also really important to always hold on to a core belief, which is that survivors know best. They know what they've lived through. They know what there's yet to be lived through. And that I see very much our role. When I say our, I really mean sort of the full circle of the holistic group of folks who are the SORV survivors, is to give them information. Is to make sure that we are supporting them and making informed decisions. Because at the end of the day, it's the survivor who experiences whatever is the outcome of the choices that they make. And they have the most information in terms of what risks may be present for them, for their community, etc. So first of all, it's making sure that we listen. It's that we are familiar and are really well informed with what the practices are in our communities, because everyone knows you have laws and then you have what really happens. And that plays out in so many different ways based on race, class, socioeconomic status, where you live, immigration status, etc. And so I think it's absolutely critical that those of us who are working with survivors always make sure that we have as much information about what's really happening on the ground, and then can present that information in a very clear, accessible way, and allow a survivor to make informed choices. So, for example, I do a huge amount of work in the privacy arena, and we have a lot of conversation about what really is informed consent. It means knowing where this information will go, who will have access to it, or if you're agreeing to release it or deciding to release it, what the implications are of these other entities having that information about you or about other folks in your constellation, and what are the potential consequences of that. And then the survivor gets to make an informed decision.
Yeah. Well, and what have been some of the sort of responses or reverberations of empowering and guiding folks the way that you do with your training and technical assistance? Like, are there situations where you've been able to really see the impact of that in the way that it, filtered down to the wider community?
We'll definitely see the impact. Otherwise, it would have been decades that we'd still be doing this. First of all, it's just, as somebody who trains thousands of people, it's incredibly exciting to watch those sparks when there is, people have those aha moments.
Mm-hmm.
Like, oh my goodness, I never realized that. And realize that they have just been lifted up and increased significantly their capacity to really do the work on the ground directly with survivors. Here's another example. A number of years ago, I started teaching at the law school. I became an adjunct professor because I thought we have to grow our own attorneys in this movement. But we need to sort of convert those who are not currently doing this work, but also we want to imbue them with this, the up-and-coming lawyers with a sense of commitment and understanding about the realities of sexual assault and sexual violence. There was another part of your question I lost track of.
Like sort of the impact and how
Yes.
this work has shaped different communities.
Yeah. Every community is different and has its own set of needs, and I see our role very much as helping folks identify where are the gaps in your community and how can we as National Technical Assistance Providers at the Victim Rights Law Center help fill those gaps. So for example, if victim service providers are coming together and they want to build a coordinated community response to sexual assault, well, conversations are absolutely critical to take place before they start doing the work. Are they looking at systemic issues? Are they talking about individual cases? And often there's a rush, like, let's run out and let's look at these open cases and help survivors. And, I'm like, let's hit the pause button and think, who's going to be talking about what? What permission do you have? Who else is at the table? Does everyone know who's at the table is going to be having access to this? Or we do a tremendous amount of work in the education arena. And as you might imagine, that is an area right now that there are a lot of unknowns and some pretty rapidly shifting terrain. So how do we help victim service providers, again, keep helping survivors? And talk about impact. We know that there is an inverse relationship between education and poverty. So to the extent that we can help survivors either continue in school or take a break and then return successfully, we're having extraordinary impact, not only in the immediate moment of their life, but really long term. Obviously, I think in the immigration arena, we have a huge impact helping survivors, whether it's with individuals who've experienced human trafficking or victims of violent crimes, and understand what their legal rights are and pursue the legal remedies that this country has made available to them. Obviously, achieving economic stability, and our role is both doing that in the direct services side, but also training and educating and supporting others and doing that work in their own jurisdictions. And so we always leverage, this is what I know and this is how I can help you do it. So I can only help a limited number of survivors, but if I'm in fact, every year helping thousands of other advocates and lawyers and other victim service responders in turn help survivors, then we're having a huge effect nationally.
Yeah, and I also feel like, you not only see the moving parts and the areas where there is need for improvement across sort of all these different sectors that are shaping a survivor's experience, but also I imagine that you've had this first-hand account of the sea change of the Me Too movement. So what have you seen in the last couple of years doing this work? Is there a renewed interest? Is there more, is there more urgency? Do you feel like there's more support? Like, have you sort of been able to gauge that in your own work?
Absolutely. So the first thing is, when I say now that I work on issues of sexual violence, most people know what I'm talking about. I used to joke that somehow I would say I worked in the anti-sexual violence movement, and between the time the words left my mouth and it reached their ears, sexual became domestic.
Oh my God.
And I'm like, no, there certainly are many survivors of domestic violence who've experienced sexual victimization, but I'm talking exclusively about sexual assault. Mm-hmm. And so I think just that's definitely a sea change. And there has been just much more discussion and awareness, and I think acceptability of having conversations about sexual assault. Because I think part of why that shift would occur from sexual becoming domestic is that talking or even thinking about sexual assault just made everyone uncomfortable. I often joke, I can ruin any cocktail party. But having it become a topic of everyday conversation. It's in the newspapers, it's in the magazines, not just in Liz magazine, but in many other, journals all around the country. So really a growing recognition and acceptance and willingness to recognize that this is happening, to take steps to say, what can we do in our community? So that has been just a sea change, I think, in terms of awareness and willingness to engage on the topic. So, but after that, we're also seeing it from, sort of the movie star level, engaging with the farm worker movement, this growing network or web of interconnectedness, which I think did not exist previously. And then at the very practical level, certainly having, Time's Up, whether it's the money to help survivors access attorneys, and also a growing cadre of lawyers. We at the Victim Rights Law Center administer pro bono projects, which means that we have attorneys who donate their time to help represent survivors where we practice, and again, growing awareness there. And I think some shifting. There really used to be a time where at the law enforcement level, there was a deep suspicion of anyone who reported sexual assault and who knew they were assaulted. You know, we say there are only 3 defenses to sexual assault, right? It wasn't me, it didn't happen, it was consensual. And I think it's still very, very, very slow, but we are beginning to see just much more increased awareness that just because someone says it was consensual, that's not what your investigation ends.
Yeah.
You actually have a job to do and to explore, to gather evidence, to talk to witnesses. And I wish I could say that like the Me Too movement had been this panacea for, you know, everything that happened and now we're great and good to go, but we both know that's the last thing that's true. You have organizations that are, you know, pushing the law enforcement community to start a believing campaign. We have the interviewers who have learned about doing trauma-informed interviewing with victims. So it's really, I might say, infiltrating kind of in all of the different disciplines. And I think for this many survivors themselves, this sense of community. I always say many years ago when I first began to identify as a feminist, someone once said to me, the thing about becoming a feminist is you learn you're never the only one. And I think that's been true with the Me Too movement.
Yeah, and how do you think we can best leverage that? You know, like with the theme of the conference being Beyond the Breakthrough, like what do you think are the most ripe opportunities right now for areas where we can really strategically say, okay, like now that there is this growing interest, this growing community, and all these growing efforts, these are the ways in which we're going to most powerfully sort of multiply that impact of Me Too?
That's a good question. Well, I'm a lawyer, so with the law, and I often think about the ways in which law drives social policy, which drives social change, and also social change drives policy, which drives the law. So I mean, it really is, you can take the circle in either direction. And so going forward, I think we have to figure out how best to capitalize on that. Or we have the attention, certainly in the United States, of many folks who never really thought about this issue very deeply, didn't care about it, weren't engaged, didn't believe survivors, didn't want to talk about it. There's been an upheaval in that way. So some of it, for me, when I say, okay, where do you go next? It's you think about what laws do you need to change? How do you fundamentally change the legal system, the civil system, and the criminal system in which survivors are operating? So, for example, we were seeing many jurisdictions change their laws around statutes of limitation for survivors of child sexual abuse. It used to be you had maybe 2 years, 3 years in which to bring a lawsuit, and now we're increasing numbers of states are saying we need to give survivors a lot more time. We need to give them many years after they turn 18 or after they recognize that there's a connection between the harm that they've experienced in their lives and the victimization that occurred. Now, some of that becomes much more possible to get legislators, you know, they're individuals. We talk about the legislature, but really it's made up of just people like us. And so Me Too and this growing conversation and discussion and awareness about sexual assault has, of course, I think, opened up their minds and made much more possible. And as you, for example, make it possible for child sexual abuse survivors to sue the people who harmed them, I think hopefully there's a little bit more fear going on in those who are perpetrating, who thought, you know, nobody will ever believe them.
Yeah.
They won't be able to do anything about it, to realizing this could become public. I could become that newspaper article. I could lose my home. I could lose my job. And yeah, I want that fear to exist if it says in any role at all that they can play in stopping perpetration. But also because we have this growing awareness among individuals, survivors just exist in a whole different climate. And that, I think, can affect change for decades and generations to come.
Yeah, for sure. And, I think that those are the moments where, accountability becomes prevention in a certain way, right? Like when people see that there's a culture of accountability, they recognize that they too will be held accountable, and that could sort of shift behavior. Yeah, so I think that this is an exciting moment, and I'm glad that the work you've been doing was laying the groundwork for this moment, and that, the work that you continue to do will sort of expand on it too.
And really thinking of us as a movement. So the Me Too is also the We Too.
Yeah.
And that we all play a key role. I often like to help folks think about it as a bicycle wheel, and there's sort of many different spokes make up for many different sectors. And in order for that wheel to roll forward, for the change to keep happening, we have to have all of those sectors.
Yeah.
And that we have to go forward in unity to make it all strong.
Totally. I love that. I think that is very true. And yeah, thank you so much for everything you're doing and for taking the time today to talk to us. It's been really interesting. And yeah, thank you.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Yay.
At 8:30 in the morning.